Hello and welcome back to this damn fully idealistic crusade. This video is a home video history and overview of the releases of Sergio Leone's masterpiece Once Upon a Time in the West from 1968 across home video formats, starting with its initial 1985 home releases from Paramount, who has handled all of the major format releases in the US, and since they are the primary distributor and producer, they control most, if not all, of the releases worldwide to this day. The film has seen a number of reconstructions and restorations over the years to try and combat the not only myriad of versions out there, which were really done to try and combat what dates back to Paramount's terrible decision to cut over 20 minutes of the film for the original United States wide release. The film did play uncut in only a few major cities for a very short period of time on the very first release in 1968, and then those prints were taken and conformed to the new cut down version, which also created a lot of plot holes and inconsistencies, severely damaged the impact of the film, and really helped to lead to its poor box office performance and critical failure on the original wide 1968 release. And since that point, there have been multiple different edits and versions made over the years to cover up some of those edits. That was done by Paramount throughout the late 60s and early 70s, and it wasn't until 1973 that the first attempt was made to reconstruct the film, and then that was followed later by a 1984 reconstruction, which is the version that all versions since and restorations since have used as their basis. However, that 1984 reconstruction was not perfect, was not complete, was missing footage, and most notably created a very noticeable ending error because they used as their reference the 1973 reconstruction that did not have the correct original ending in its original form, but instead used one of the edited versions that employed a freeze frame to try and cover up further removed footage, which was removed to cover up the major deletion from the ending, which is the worst of the deletions that Paramount made in 1968. The errors and mistakes made in 1984, particularly surrounding the ending, have lasted all this time since. So we've had 40 years of, in particular, the ending music and end credits error that persists to this day and has lasted through multiple different restorations. Again, there is also footage that was in the original 1968 release in all territories that has never been restored to any American version of the film, as it was part of what was cut by Paramount for time in and around the period between 1968 and 1970. It is present in all original uncut 1968 prints. It is present in all foreign versions from that time. But since Paramount will use their master worldwide, the Paramount version is what you see in all different territories across all the Paramount releases or releases utilizing the primary Paramount master. I have gone into more detail about the overall edit history of the film, the material that is still missing, and other elements such as the screwed up ending, which we've been stuck with for 40 years now, in a separate video, but I am briefly going over them here because it is important to understand the film's home video release history and also understand that there is no proper uncut release of the film without any error that has all of the correct footage that was in the original theatrical release in 1968 intact, so no version technically represents Sergio Leone's vision or his so-called director's cut, and any of the blurbs or press releases about the various restorations or claiming that it is a complete director's cut, or any of the blurbs on the home video releases claiming as such, are in fact wrong and completely incorrect because Paramount has never been bothered to correct the 1984 errors, to correct the errors to the ending music and ending credit sequence, or to fully restore all of the missing footage that can be located in foreign print elements. There's also an additional sequence that was reinstated by Paramount after it had been removed by Sergio Leone himself after the film's Italian premiere. So the primary release of the film across Europe and even the original 1968 United States prints did not have the extra scene of Harmonica, the Charles Bronson character, recovering at the train station after the opening shootout. This is known as the Harmonica Rising sequence, and if you look at any original 1968 print worldwide, regardless of what country it was from, whether it was the full uncut version or the Paramount cut US version, that scene scene is not included. This was done also to improve the film's pacing, and it creates a brilliant editing conceit of keeping harmonica off screen for a longer period of time, so his reappearance at the trading post is significantly later in the film and much more dramatic, and it gives the character a sort of spectral quality, or increases that's already in the character. And it's a brilliant editing conceit of going from one gunshot to the other, looking like you've killed your lead hero at the start of the film, as what was seen in You Only Live Twice the year before. And also, the edit has been noted as resembling, at least in some form, the iconic famous edit in 2001 A Space Odyssey, released the same year, of going from the hurled bone to an orbiting missile platform in space orbiting the Earth. And there is a great degree of truth to that. So it was a brilliant move to cut that scene, and it was only reinserted by Paramount at their own insistence, done on their own, really, in some of those versions after the 1968 wide cut release. So that was inserted into the film around 1969-1970 and has appeared in most versions since, but it is not technically supposed to be there. However, its inclusion has been around for so long, and it is an actual entire finished scene, that it's understandable that some people would wish to see the film that way because they're used to it. So any release of the film should have that scene as a branched option, because it is very much like the inclusion of the grotto scene in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which was another scene removed after the original Italian premiere by Sergio Leone himself to improve pacing, and it was a superfluous scene anyway, and that was only put back into the film by MGM during their 2002-2003 extended English language cut process, which also produced the hideously revisionist 5.1 remix with new dialogue, new sound effects that destroy the original sonic intent, and the grotto scene should never have really been included outside of being an extra, or if you were trying to recreate the premiere cut, that should have been a scene that was also seamlessly branched to view it as an optional method of seeing the film that way, which is how the harmonica rising scene should be encoded. But Paramount just stuck it back in at a certain point, and it's been stuck in most versions ever since because they control most of the rights worldwide pretty much. And then the 1984 specific reconstruction error in regards to the ending music, the finale, and the end titles all stems from the variety of different edits and versions made of the film's ending once Paramount made the cuts in 1968, and the worst cut was removing a particular death scene, which is the worst cut they made because it severely undercuts the power of the film, undercuts the power of the conclusion, practically undermines an entire performance, particularly for the final act of the film, and causes some notable issues because then the next few shots and the whole ending long shot clearly show that this character is now dead for unknown reasons if that sequence is removed. So on later reissue versions and further edits they made, they removed other shots to remove clearer views of a said character's corpse, and in doing so, at one point actually created a freeze frame of other material from the ending to try and maintain the proper placement, and then also moved up the end credits and also changed the title card to the animated spinning version we are used to seeing on all versions of the film. This is just one of multiple versions of the ending that were continually tweaked and such. But unfortunately, when the first reconstruction was done in 1973, they were able to put back the missing footage except for having the ending be screwed up. And so in 1984, they had the 1973 version as their reference, and so when they undid the freeze frame and put the correct footage back in, suddenly the picture and audio no longer matched because they were undoing changes that had already been made, but it wasn't the original version, and they didn't have another print to reference the original ending credits, timing, and music and footage and everything, which had they gotten any other print or any foreign print or even a television print, all of those were correct. So unfortunately what they did was they cut Ennio Morricone's unbelievably tragic and beautiful finale cue, which was timed to run with the whole long shot exactly all the way up to the fade to black, because Morricone famously recorded his score before the film was shot, and the film was even made to that score. Leone would play the score on the set for the actors and everyone. So if you take the cue from the soundtrack, and fans can actually do this, I've done it myself. You take the full cue from the soundtrack, simply called finale, started at the same point in the film, and it plays all the way out to the end of the long shot when it fades to black, and then we get the Paramount logo. And then in the original release, there was to have been a reprise of Cheyenne's theme as exit music. So what the 1984 team did was they had these two pieces of music, and apparently they didn't know what the reprise music was for, and so they just did a hasty and very noticeable edit of the two. So the finale cue is suddenly cut. It's a quick fade that is still audible, and then it fades up into Cheyenne's theme, which has lost the first chunk of that cue, so both cues are cut, and they're smashed together, and it causes a severe tonal inconsistency that severely undermines the emotional impact of the ending, and the film has been stuck that way for 40 years now. It's never been fixed or restored. But if you take the cue from the soundtrack, you can actually put the correct music in yourself. It syncs perfectly. You don't really have to do any work. You just start it at the correct point, and then after the Paramount logo, you can simply slot in or play the additional cue of reprising Cheyenne's theme, and then you've recreated the original 1968 ending with the exit music. That is how the film was intended to be seen. That was how it was presented on the original release. Some prints kept the exit music, some cut it, but at the very least, all major print versions, outside of changing the ending and moving the titles around and stuff, had the correct finale cue play out over the entire long shot, and that's how the film should be. No home video release has that. They're all the screwed up 1984 version. Furthermore, a later restoration tied to Martin Scorsese and the Film Foundation did put back some of the missing footage into the film in around 2007, and that was released on the 2011 Blu-ray. But it wasn't all of the footage that is still missing from the iconic opening sequence at the train station of the three killers waiting for the train. So the 1968 original release has significantly more material, more shots that really help to fill out the sequence further, add a few extra touches of humor. The little moments of time and bits of business play out more fully and more naturally, and it is a much better sequence. And ironically, it plays better and feels quicker with those shots restored and seeing the sequence as originally edited and intended than the slightly trimmed version does. So even though they cut this for time, it was absolutely, I think, insane to only cut these few little tiny pieces that add so much to that iconic sequence. So as much as that sequence has been studied and analyzed over the years, that is actually a cut version of the sequence that is being studied. It's not the full original intended version. And the two shots that were added back in the 2007 or 2011 restoration, whatever you want to call it, the slightly extended cut that's on the Blu-ray and the new 4K UHD, that's only two shots out of entire small sequences. So there's still, I'd say, a minute or two of footage that is still missing from the iconic opening. So that is still incomplete on all versions of the film, outside of original 1968 copies or whatever you can get your hands on in terms of various older prints that were actually complete. So to turn to the home video releases, the first major home video release actually happened in 1985, so a year after the 1984 reconstruction, which presumably was done to tie in to the release of Once Upon a Time in America, which was Leone's final film, unfortunately, but also was going through its own editing hardships, and there was a definite battle to get the film put back into its intended 229-minute version. But the 1984 reconstruction, with all of its errors and things intact, was basically made into new prints that could be shown theatrically. It seems like Paramount waited until this was done to actually release the film on video, because I guess they felt like they didn't have an element they could use for home video, and just using the television print was, I guess, not up to par or something, or maybe they just hadn't gotten around to it. But they could have very easily used one of the television prints, which apparently were mostly or fully uncut, depending on which print you had, or they could have used one of the various edits from 1968 to 1970-71, or they could have used the 1973 reconstruction print, which was complete except for having the screwy freeze frame version of the ending, and of course also had the opening missing footage intact. So that restoration actually got the opening right, and then it quickly got undone and never fixed. So the 1985 release is really the home video premiere in terms of the main Paramount releases, and was released on VHS, Beta, and Laserdisc, albeit in, of course, pan and scanned versions. The best release, of course, is the Laserdisc, which has the highest picture quality of the three, but this, of course, only has an analog mono soundtrack. And since they were seemingly transferring a 1984 reconstruction print directly, there is plenty of print wear in this, and there is plenty of noise in the audio because it sounds like they just copied the optical track exactly. In spite of that, this actually holds up pretty darn well for a 1985 pan and scanned copy manufactured directly from a 1984 reconstruction print. And it's, the pan and scanning on this film on all the pan and scan versions is quite terrible because you don't do that to a Leone film. But for a disc in 1985, this is a lot more solid than I expected it to be in terms of presentation quality. And the audio, particularly for the music, sounds quite good. It's obviously from optical, but all the dialogue has a lot of noise and there's distortion in the track because they were literally just, it sounds like they copied an optical track. And it seems like they would revisit this when they did the letterbox master, because that actually also comes from a 1984 print directly. So this basically starts the ball rolling. It gives us the first rendering of this sort of painted artwork version of the main characters that would carry over to the next couple releases and the next Laserdisc. And nicely, this has a nice sort of gloss finish on the sleeve. We have the usual Paramount logos, and then we have the typical Paramount laser video disc bar across the corner, which is common to all Paramount titles. The rear is also the usual Paramount design for this era, with a good selection of stills, although it does start the trend of including some of the same stills on all the releases, and one in particular, as you can see, kind of spoils the ending duel. And that still has made it on to most every video release of the film for unknown reasons. The text is short but nicely done, but if you read the text very closely, you'll note this is the first version of the text that is on most of all the other releases in terms of the video rear cover blurb. So they usually just would adjust and slightly tweak or slightly rewrite it, but this one has stayed through most of them, and then the UHD has like one or two sentences reworked from this. So this little blurb has kind of made it through all the video releases. Again, this has a nice sort of gloss finish, so the jacket is quite nice, and it is a nice display piece, but it's obviously a 1985 Paramount Pan and Scan release, and all their Laserdiscs from this era are pretty much the same. Some nice imagery, sometimes a gloss finish, but otherwise rather plain. Unfortunately, it's 2 discs and there's no gatefold, so it is very difficult to get a copy like this that's not super dinged up or has blown out corners. So I looked around for ages until I could finally find one that was inexpensive and didn't have a cover that was totally shot. Again, the Laserdisc only has analog audio, so the VHS and beta releases with the hi-fi options will technically have a higher quality audio rendering if you can find a mint copy, but of course will have much less picture quality due to the format differences. But they will also be the same very early pan and scan transfer of a 1984 print with the same defects and the same exact audio seemingly taken from an optical track. Now, interestingly, Paramount would take almost 10 years to actually revisit the film. This is one of the titles that they only seem to want to come back to and work on again every once in a while. So there were some various repackagings or reprintings of the 1985 version on VHS primarily, but they were the same presentation. Paramount would also do that. They would just reprint the same VHS copy with updated labels or copyright dates until there was an actual catalog refresh with a new master. So in 1994, we finally got that with the new version, which was finally a letterbox presentation. This is the letterbox Laserdisc. There was also a VHS release in pan and scan and a letterboxed variant, which is quite uncommon. And then the Laserdisc also got a pan and scan variant, unfortunately, which is the same cover artwork but doesn't have the widescreen banner across the top. This, of course, reuses the same artwork, but it's now properly centered, and the overall jacket looks much nicer. It's a much thicker cardstock. It has a little bit of gloss finish on it, but it's got a nicer sort of premium feel. And there's actually a gatefold this time, so they actually learned from their mistake. There's a nice wraparound usage of scope imagery. The film is nicely split over 3 sides, but unfortunately there are no supplements. I'm sorry that this copy has always been like this, with a little bit of damage in the gatefold. For whatever reason, when I got this, it was still in the original plastic, but there had been some glue or something in the gatefold, so unfortunately, that did tear when I originally got this, but just imagine that's not there. The rear is a nicer design, nicer layout of nice images, but once again, the very spoilery image has also been retained, and again would make it over to most releases. We basically have the same text from the 1985 release in terms of the blurb about the film, but we have the technical information here. This again is the 1984 reconstruction, now finally transferred in widescreen with a PCM digital lossless rendering of the mono mix. This remains to this day the best fidelity you can get for the English mono mix on any of the home video releases, and releases since have basically, in terms of what's labeled the mono track, basically been an increasingly overprocessed and further watered down and worse sounding version of what's here on the 1994 Laserdisc. Of course, this also means it's got the audio problems at the end of the film because it is the 1984 version, and it is missing the material at the opening of the film from the opening sequence, so it's also not uncut. But this is still a very solid Laserdisc for the time. It's a solid master for the time. The color timing isn't perfect, and they were again using a 1984 print as is. So since this is letterbox, you can actually see the changeover cues come up when the real changes happen. So if you like seeing that sort of thing on a Laserdisc, then you can enjoy that here. But it also shows that they were literally using a 1984 print again and using that for just making a new video master. But this time they made an improved one that actually had digital audio and, of course, was actually letterboxed. After the film's 1994 release, it would sit on a shelf in a sort of self-imposed moratorium for yet another 9 years before there's any further work done or a new master or new deluxe release with supplements or anything. So in between 1994 and 2003, all you saw were a few more reprintings of the film on VHS in its pan and scanned version with slightly tweaked and updated versions of the cover art, but it was basically the same tape master just being repressed. There were no further Laserdisc editions. So 9 years after the 1994 Laserdisc, we finally saw an update with the 2003 Special Collector's Edition 2-disc DVD set. This, of course, had all of the new supplements and extras produced exclusively for this release, a new commentary track, and a new transfer that also took the liberty of making a 5.1 remix of the film, in addition to a track labeled Original Mono. This was, again, a new transfer of the film with a new color timing and was finally bringing the film to DVD and actually giving it proper respect in a deluxe edition that was a 2-disc set, which wasn't very common for Paramount catalog titles, so this was definitely them showing that they knew this was an important title and they had to put the effort in. This has really simple but honestly extraordinarily effective artwork, taking an image from the opening gunfight sequence, playing around with it, and making, I think, an outstanding DVD cover that is simplicity itself, but it so perfectly suggests the film. And for me, if you aren't going to use the original iconic, amazing poster artwork, I think this is not only arguably alongside the original painted cover, possibly the best home media version of the film's artwork for a cover art design, it's still probably my favorite overall because it's again simplicity itself, but it is beautifully done. We have the thicker spine because Paramount opted for one of these double tier or double width DVD cases. The rear has a matching design. It looks quite nice. We have a nice headshot of each of the main characters, and then we have the extensive list of supplements which still form the bulk of the film's extras on modern releases. The text, once again, is basically a slight reworking of the original 1985 home blurb about the film. You open the thicker case to find the 2 discs housed in the DVD hinged design in terms of having one disc slightly stacked on top of one of another, and there's no printed material or booklet. This is the first pressing with the original artwork. This would be transitioned later into just a standard generic Paramount label. But what's always been annoying about this particular type of DVD case, it's thicker because it's got 2 discs, but there's no booklet or anything. And eventually they had quickly already by this point come up with a better standard keep case to hold 2 discs, because what's also bad about these is the disc hubs are really terrible because they are so difficult to get discs in and out of. This was one of the first type cases I ever got with this design, and I was a kid at the time, but I thought every time, and honestly I still do, it kind of makes you think you're going to have to break the disc to get it out. You have to put a dedicated amount of pressure on the hub and really mash in there, and then lightly try to pull up on the disc as you go. And even though I've had this since about 2003, it's still just as difficult to get these on and off. So you have to be extraordinarily careful. But once you do that, you have disc 2 with the supplements and a beautiful custom label as well. Now, this transfer was a huge step forward over the Laserdisc, and of course it was 480p progressive component video for DVD versus 420i interlaced for Laserdisc. But it does have some quirks of its own. The color timing favors the sort of reddish pink more than anything, and also has some of the DVD era issues of edge enhancement and other stuff going on. But all in all, it still holds up as a pretty solid DVD. The audio, again, you have a mono option, and then you have the 5.1 remix, which is unfortunately given prominence. This is a remix that is tasteful. It is working from original elements and not adding anything, but honestly, it is inferior to the original mono mix because it does alter the feel of all the scenes in the film in terms of the effects not being at the same levels. The music is more in stereo instead of mono. It's a different sonic character, but from this point onward, it unfortunately became the sort of de facto standard audio for the film. And the track labeled mono has been, again, processed to such a degree that it does sound inferior to what's on the 1994 Laserdisc and would get processed further on the successive releases from this point. And it's also possible that it's not even the mono mix and it's just a down mix of the remix. It's hard to tell because they are quite similar, and also the mono tracks on all the releases from the DVD onward have been quite processed that it's hard to even tell if it's the original or a down mix or not. But this is the point at which the film's audio got really processed for the first time in the home video realm, and this is where the 5.1 mix really started. And again, it is inferior to the original mono mix. These films were meticulously designed by Leone and the crew to be real sonic experiences, even though they were single channel mono and then dubbed into other languages. But they need to be heard and experienced in their original single channel mono design, and that mono audio needs to be properly restored as well, which this film has never really gotten. And that's how it stood for the film for a few more years. But thankfully, it didn't take a full 9 years to see the film get a Blu-ray release. It only took 8 years. So in 2011, we got the Blu-ray release. Now, this was yet another restoration, or produced out of another restoration, which apparently started or was done in and around 2007 or so, if I'm understanding the sort of timeline correctly. But this is where Martin Scorsese and the Film Foundation enter the picture, really, because they are credited with being on the restoration along with La Imagen Ritrovata, who are behind all of the horrible color timing fiascos of other Leone films. But their scanning and restoration work is usually relatively top tier. You just have to get the raw files from them and don't let them touch the color whatever you do, because they don't know what the hell they're doing, and they ruin most everything they touch. So this was a joint venture between Scorsese, the Film Foundation, Ritrovata, and Paramount, and yet another restoration for the film. And this was where they finally put back some of the footage that was missing in the opening sequence. But again, they only put back 2 shots. there's still a significant amount of more material that's missing, and totals to be about at least a minute or two of footage that is still missing from the opening sequence. So again, they put back some, but only a fraction of what's still missing. So all of this together totals about, I think it's about 45, 46 seconds or so of new material, and also that includes the new credit for Scorsese and the Film Foundation and the new work. So actually the new footage is more like 19 or 20 seconds that was put back. So the branched version on this disc, that's the restored extended version. It's about a minute longer in runtime, but there's only about 19 or 20 seconds of actual footage restored. The transfer was, of course, made from this new version and was a noticeable improvement over the now outdated DVD. But it showed a new sort of approach to the color timing, which almost seemed a bit desaturated or lacking in color. It has a very almost dim and grungy appearance in places, and it seems to want to focus most on the color brown in terms of the color timing. So this is kind of a step forward and a step backward at the same time. It's also not a meticulous frame-by-frame restoration. There's a little bit of movement, there's a little bit of wear, a little bit of damage, a little bit of speckles and things. And in spite of it having some noise in the transfer and such, and having the color timing be an issue, at least it was also kind of more of a hands-off approach to handling the film and putting it on a physical media release. So I've always been able to appreciate this disc for its positives. It's not perfect, but it's still important in 2024. The audio is basically reusing what was on the DVD. We have the 5.1 remix again. Now it's in a lossless format. And then we have a lossy mono track that has some of the same source defects that go all the way back to the 1994 Laserdisc transfer of the 1984 audio. And the lossy track on here doesn't sound that great. So the audio did not get really any restoration work outside of sourcing the audio for the extra frames they put in for the 20 or so seconds that was restored to the film. So this does at least give you both versions. You have the 1984 version essentially, and then the slightly extended version as a branched option. So you're given the option to see the two, whichever you choose to see. And then all of the legacy extras are ported over, but they're not upgraded at all. They are just standard def files, upscaled, and of course they can look quite a bit noisy on this release. This cover artwork is basically a modernized version of the artwork that was developed for the final run of the DVD pressings, which had the same layout of our characters here, and of course has put the super spoilery still of a certain character now front and center on the cover. So just by looking at their body language, it's a huge spoiler. So now it's on the front cover. But instead of having the sort of aged appearance of the way it was on the DVD, they've updated the font a little bit, and they've given it this color sort of desaturated look, which ironically matches the transfer in terms of the color timing. So they got that right. This is still an okay cover, but it's just super modernized looking. And again, this is one of those covers that has a big spoiler image right on the frickin' front cover, and that's a big no-no. But nobody really talks about that. But I could even tell that when I would see this image as a kid. So it's not spoiling anything because you've already seen this image, you know. We have the updated spine and then the rear cover. This, of course, retains the image used for the main cover artwork of the first pressing of the DVD. And as you can see by this sticker here, I picked this up when Warner Brothers had started doing the distribution for Paramount, because shortly after they made this Blu-ray, they basically got out of doing catalog titles on physical media and would actually have Warner Brothers do the actual disc distribution and handle all the disc business. So you will find Paramount discs still to this day with this Warner sticker on it from that time period. Again, all of the 2003 supplements make it over, but the big inclusion now is a brand new scan of the theatrical trailer in HD, which has also been ported to the UHD release. And that's important because it's a nice scope original American trailer with no color fading, so it looks pretty solid. It's been transferred pretty well, and in spite of the wear, it's at least a nice representation with a very filmic look to it that shows you the color difference comparing that to the 2011 transfer, and also shows you how bad the new 4K master's been handled when you look at it on the UHD release. On the inside, we just have a generic label for the disc. That is it. And as you can see, I've had this so long that I saved the original store tag from Hastings, which of course is a store that is long out of business. Then it took quite a long while for the film to ever get any new work done to it. And so finally, 13 years later, here in 2024, we have the new Paramount Presents 4K UHD and remastered Blu-ray release, which is from yet another new restoration with Richard Vada, the Film Foundation, Scorsese, and Paramount. This is being advertised and promoted as being supervised and signed off on by Scorsese himself, and of course has all of the hallmarks of Paramount's tomfoolery in the 4K realm with the masters they've been cranking out, and is super overpriced and being sold as a premium release as part of this Presents line at a $40 plus tax price point, and it is not a premium release at all. So this follows the sort of standard of these Paramount Presents releases. We have the new slipcover with new artwork instead of having the original poster artwork. This new Paramount Presents mountain logo here in the corner telling you that this is really a mountain of crap. Then, of course, since they make these slipcovers hinged, they're always slanted in this sort of way. All of these are like this. It's not a defect. It's just that they're so poorly designed. They're literally designed to be like this. And I'm having to hold the cover closed because it naturally does this no matter what you do. Again, there's a gloss finish on here, and they give a metallic sheen to the spine, and they've also given these a spine number as they're trying to pretend these are like a boutique label release from Criterion or something, again, which they're not. The opening flap for this sort of gatefold always on these has a rendering of some original poster artwork. So this is a super glossy rendering of legendary Frank McCarthy's beautiful, breathtaking artwork for the original US one-sheet poster. Why no one has ever used this for the cover of a home video release of this film is beyond me, but at least we finally have it somehow. But of course, it's awkwardly done because it's sideways and there's a thick gloss on here, so you have to find the right angle to not get glare on it. And of course, you're having to hold it sideways, so it's just weird all around. I don't know why Paramount does this, but this is how all of their Present slipcovers are. And then, of course, when you take the disc out, it's hard to get back in because it's slanted on the slipcover and it collapses in on itself. So if you get one of these Presents releases and you think the slipcover is defective, it's not. That's just how they're made. The rear has some updated imagery. They're trying to make it look a little more modern, which is okay. And at least we finally got rid of having the super spoilery still on a release. But here is where I have major bones of contention with this, because they talk about this being the definitive experience of the film and personally signed off on and supervised by Scorsese and the Film Foundation and Richard Vada, and having Dolby Vision and HDR10, and then down here having the audacity to say that this is the utmost in audiovisual quality and you're paying a premium price to get a premium product, which you certainly are not. So then to quickly go over the case with the same artwork in a clear case, the same rear artwork, but honestly, if it could be cheaper for just skipping this silly slip cover that's kind of dinky anyway, I would be perfectly fine buying this piece of crap and paying half the price just to go without this. And usually when they sell out of this, they eventually do a repressing either without the slip cover or with a simplified version for usually half the cost. So that's what they should do in the first place, because inside you just have the new UHD and the new Blu-ray made from the new master with a generic photo collage in the background, no printed materials, no anything, so it's very plain. So again, this is one of these Paramount Presents releases that's just overpriced and trying to act like a boutique release, which it isn't. Now, as I've already detailed in my extremely lengthy review of the UHD release, I think this is one of the worst physical media releases of all time, because it shows Paramount treats the film with contempt and treats the consumer with contempt and thinks we're all stupid. They took what seems like a lovely new 4K scan that they had made of their element, So it retains all of the problems of past releases and is not a complete version of the film. It still has the harmonica rising sequence shoved in, which should be branched for optional viewing. It's still missing all the footage from the opening train sequence, and it still has the 1984 ending error, which is just completely messed up in terms of the music and the title placement and everything, which again is still incredibly jarring, and everyone notices it at some point and mentions how jarring or weird that music shift is. So it has all of that stuff baked in, but Paramount took it upon themselves to take what was seemingly a great new scan and hit it with what would be termed by them just some grain management, which means they hit it with a inconsistent DNR pass that does remove a great amount of detail. And while there is still film grain left in the image, so much is lost that at times you have moments where there are certain shots that have definitely a soft and smeary effect to them, particularly a lot of the long shots, and a great number of the close-ups in the film are shorn of detail, particularly the close-ups of Claudia Cardinale most of all. And if that were not bad enough, they shoved the nearly 3-hour-long film onto a BD66 disc instead of using a triple-layered BD100, which means the compression is absolutely terrible, and you'll see nothing but compression artifacts throughout the transfer, which mix in with a little bit of grain left and the sort of smoothed-over look from their grain management DNR pass that results in a terrible and frequently hideous looking image that undermines a great new scan that does have better color timing and does have nice usage of HDR. And if you're looking at it in the Dolby Vision presentation, that does at least smooth over some of these problems, but not all of them. They're still there, and they're hallmarks of Paramount's terrible efforts in making these UHDs and having frequently bad compression artifacts and issues and noise halo blobs and all the stuff that is basically Paramount trademarks in the 4K realm. But if you switch over to the HDR10 version, you don't have Dolby Vision trying to work miracles by trying to cover up some of this stuff. And all of these problems and the horrible artifacts become even worse. And so what I felt was just an insult on the Dolby Vision version is stratospherically bad on the HDR10 version. So if you're purchasing this disc and you don't have the ability to view in Dolby Vision, you're already getting a severely downgraded version of this terrible version. And to make matters worse, there is a high-end streaming service known as Kaleidoscape that does their own encodes of the same files the studios use to make disc releases, and their releases in 4K are only in HDR10, and you have to have their specific equipment to stream those versions. But some reviewers and people have already noticed and been able to confirm that not only is their version significantly larger in file size by about 30 gigabytes of file size, larger than the UHD version, but it has significantly less to very little compression artifacts because it's massively larger than the disc version. So if you happen to have a Kaleidoscape, and unfortunately I don't because I don't stream things and it's expensive and it's not a service I've looked into getting before. I have no real use for it. But if you have it, you only have to pay $14.99 for a superior visual experience of this 4K master. But you've still got the baked-in problems from the inconsistent DNR application, and you're losing Dolby Vision because that's HDR10 only. So that is one positive of the disc, that it has Dolby Vision. But the disc is also $40 plus tax, and it's an inferior encode, and so it's worse than a streaming version technically because Paramount's going to Paramount for no reason. If that were not bad enough, if you look at the new remastered Blu-ray of the new master, like a good number of Paramount releases that have both formats, it's properly encoded. So the Blu-ray is technically better in its encoding than the UHD disc is. It has less compression artifacts, but then you're having to upscale 1080p SDR, and it's the same source master, so it has the same grain management problem, but it does lessen some of the overall issues because the 1080p SDR and upscaling that does sort of, like the Dolby Vision, it sort of covers up some of that. It's still there, unfortunately, but when you upscale the new remastered Blu-ray, because it sort of covers that up a little bit, and because for some reason you get the sense of it being a little bit noisier in terms of the image upscaled on a 4K OLED television, in some ways it gives a sort of feeling that you're seeing an image that actually has some of the detail restored in it. So In some areas and aspects, the 1080p SDR disc is not only technically better, but is actually preferable to the UHD in certain respects, which is mind-boggling. But that's another Paramount thing in the 4K realm. This is reminding me of their UHD of 48 hours compared to the Blu-ray and the encoding problems there, and Dolby Vision versus HDR10 and all that stuff. So this is something we see with Paramount a lot. But to have not only a streaming version, but the 1080p SDR Blu-ray disc version in the same package have picture and encoding elements that are superior to a UHD with Dolby Vision is just insane. And on top of that, the audio is once again the 5.1 remix and the mono track, but it's been processed a little bit more. Sounds just a little bit EQ'd and normalized compared to the 2011 Blu-ray mono track. Still sounds woefully inferior to the 1994 Laserdisc audio of the English mono track, and still has the same problems baked in terms of the ending dating back 40 years to 1984. So I'm not happy with the audio either. And then you look at the supplemental features and what might make this a premium release that you have to pay $40 plus tax for. It ports over all of the 2003 extras again. They're not updated at all, and the producer actually offered to update the extras himself because he wanted them to be in better quality, but Paramount in the past had said no for the 2011 Blu-ray, and so once again these files have been ported over. They don't look super great, but at least they're still somewhat presentable, upscaled from their standard def source, but they could have been updated for this release in terms of having the original source files and retransferring things. We have the original commentary from 2003, and then we have the two new supplements, which quite frankly are kind of worthless and not worth upgrading for. The first is a very brief Leonard Maltin intro, which is another of his usual wonderfully done intro pieces where he's sort of hitting the high points. It's very much like a host doing an intro on Turner Classic Movies. It means you can't cover all the ground that a film critic can cover on Leone or this film. So it's basically a small intro. It's not worth upgrading for. So you can't sell this as a premium release like it's got a great new video featurette or something. The other is a new commentary by the hosts of the Spaghetti Western podcast. As a podcast episode, it's fine. As a commentary, as much as I don't want to criticize commentaries, it's not good. It's two guys talking about the film. Yes, they obviously love it, but there's a lot of gaps in the track. There's moments where they kind of question some plot points that I'm kind of scratching my head wondering, why would you question that? It's quite obvious that that's a particular plot point there for a reason. And then there's also a lot of gaps in the track. So again, if this was just something you listen to as part of their podcast, that would be one thing. And it's very difficult to make a commentary. It's a very difficult art. Until you actually try to make some of your own, it's hard to criticize them, I think, because I think they are undervalued, as they are extremely difficult to do and do well. I've done almost 30 on my own, and it never gets any easier. But you can also then quickly tell the commentaries that are great from the commentaries that are average, and then the others that are just kind of head scratchers and are difficult to get through. And this is certainly one of those. So neither of the only two new supplements on this supposed premium release are really worth anything. One's an intro, one's a podcast commentary. This was the perfect time to get Sir Christopher Frayling back to do a feature-length commentary on the film, so he could also cover this film with a full-length commentary, as he has done for most of Leone's other work. Lastly, there is an additional non-Paramount release, which is very important, but also very obscure and very tough to find. That is the CVC-labeled DVD release, which came out in Italy and is a Region 2 PAL disc. That is apparently based on an earlier Italian reconstruction attempt of the film to basically try and, it seems, recreate the longest version of the film that they could with the various footage they could find. So even though it is in PAL format and of course has 4% speed up at 25 frames per second, it is still several minutes longer than the longest of Paramount's versions, and has not only the missing footage from the opening sequence, but has a number of additional additional moments in terms of shot lengths running a bit longer, having a couple alternate angles and things, and having a different version of the end credits in terms of having the Italian text and title. But it also retains some of the stuff from the Paramount version, so it has the harmonica rising scene, and it has its own edit of the ending music cues, which at least is a little better edited, but it took me a while to figure out what this version was, as I've only been able to see clips of it online. I've never been able to actually get the DVD itself, but there is a thread on the Sergio Leone web board, Fistful of Leone, that does indicate that this is not some extended cut print or something, but it was actually an earlier non-Paramount attempt to try and make the longest version of the film possible, whether that was accurate to any release version or not. So there is another version of the film floating around out there on an old obscure PAL Italian DVD that does have exclusive footage and angles, so that would be important to preserve, or find those elements and preserve them. And as with all the other Leone films, it never fails that stills or scraps of film or other versions or other little variants turn up over the years. All the films sort of have that thing happen, whether it's footage that's found or just stills or bits of script pages or things. So it's not an unknown thing to have Leone variants or pieces or bits and bobs turn up that were not in any release version of the film. So that, I think, would be very important to preserve, and at the very least, the unique material should be included as a supplement on any U.S. release of the film. And if you could find the source of that material, maybe you could actually restore the full uncut opening sequence, because that's kind of important, and at the same time, fix the ending that's been broken for 40 years. Kind of important as well, How many restorations have we gone through now, and this has not been done? So in summary, while there are not a ton of different releases, they are unified by being primarily done by Paramount, and they all have various issues and quirks of their own. No version of the film is the director's cut. No version of the film on home video is complete, as of course including the screwy as heck 4K UHD version, which again, I think due to Paramount's contempt for the viewer and contempt for respecting the film itself, is one of the worst physical media releases of all time, simply due to how it was handled. And in spite of multiple restorations, the film is still not fully complete, not in its original release version from 1968, and there's no perfect release. So I think the UHD is so poor and so poorly done that the 2011 Blu-ray is actually preferable and is the version I would still recommend to people. But in order to have higher quality English mono, you would have to capture the 1994 Laserdisc PCM and sync that, but then also have to worry about the additional footage in terms of the slightly extended version on the 2011 disc. So you have to use that audio to patch in, and that would make the sync even more difficult. But at least that way you would have better audio, and then you'd have to take the soundtrack cues from the soundtrack release and fix the ending yourself and try to make the levels match. But at least you can easily pop them in and recreate the intended music for the ending and put the Cheyenne's theme reprise on as the exit music after the Paramount logo, because basically you have to do your own fan work and make your own fan restoration of the film, because it's taken multiple restorations and multiple physical media releases and different masters, and nobody can ever get it right. So unfortunately, this is another Leone film with a long and storied history of edits and masters on home video and physical media releases, none of which are what they should be, none of which are perfect. Some are better than others. Usually the older ones are preferable for being more hands-off and having elements you can cobble together to make your own fan restoration, because, as is increasingly more and more the case, fans have to do the work themselves that the studios refuse to do. So that's why I felt it was important to do a basic home video history overview of the major releases of Once Upon a Time in the West from Paramount across formats from 1985 to 2024 to further illustrate how the film still is without a proper perfect release, and none of them could possibly be termed the so-called director's cut, because none of them represent that, nor do they represent the original 1968 release version that was released worldwide before Paramount imposed their own cuts. So as always, I hate to be so negative and have such an information dump, but as with any Leone film, there's a lot of information and versions and releases and masters and variants experience you have to try and research and figure out, and even understanding this stuff, let alone being able to present it in something that at least is somewhat cohesive and understandable to a newcomer, is very difficult. So what you hear me going over in this video is the result of years and years of studying Leone's work and the release history of the films and the video releases of the films. So again, my sort of recommendation, if you don't have any release of the film, would still be the 2011 Blu-ray, which is very inexpensive and does retain the excellent supplements from the 2003 release. And it does not have the problems of the terrible, overpriced, horrendous 4K master and its terrible technical presentation further done by the hands of Paramount. Of course, the audio is still an issue. It's not a complete version in any release, but at least you can get a nearly complete version with some semblance of the original audio on most of the video releases, but you have to deal with that really grating, terrible 1984 ending error. And once you know about it and it explains that jarring edit you've always wondered about, you can't unhear and unsee how the ending is supposed to be. So there's that too. So as always, please do keep supporting both studios and boutique labels who actually care about films and film presentation and film preservation, who actually do the work properly, unlike Paramount. In supporting releases like those, you are able to ensure the continuance of physical media and help to keep film culture alive. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching. Know exactly what I want to do with the 4K UHD from Paramount Presents. "40 years and still can't get it right."